All right, so this is Dr. Cowan's introduction to the comic terrain. If you could please put your name and class period on it. We're going to start out with a bunch of definitions in this first sentence. So let me just read it, and then I'm going to give you definitions. The paradigms of comedy are manifold, outwardly disparate, and even refractory in their refusal to yield to generalities. Circle. Paradigms, manifold, disparate, refractory, generalities. Paradigms are patterns. Manifold means various or many. Disparate means different. Refractory means mirror-like, M-I-R-R-O-R, like. Generalities means to be labeled in general. Highlight. Far more than any other genre, comedy invites a skeptical attitude toward any effort to isolate out of its multiplicity a single principle of classification. Stop. All right. All this is saying, comedy is saying, don't judge me. That's all it's saying. Because why? Because you have the literal gamut between fart jokes and the light of God. So, like, we call it potty humor or humor of the body. Little kids especially, like my 10-year-olds, my 9 and 11-year-olds love fart jokes, right? Because they're funny. They just are. Or poop jokes, funny. So comedy on the lower end, you have the comedy of the body, and on the higher end, you have the comedy of the divine. In other words, at the very end of Dante's Divine Comedy, he sees the light of God. This book here for this very reason. I'm taking it home yet just so I can read this part to you. At the very end of Dante's Divine Comedy, in the Purgatory, in the Paradiso, he says, this is when he sees the light of God. I'm going to just kind of read around the last couple pages. Whoever sees that light is soon made such that it would be impossible for him to set that light aside for other sight, because the good, the object of the will, is fully gathered in that light, outside that light, where there is perfect, where there perfect is defective. By the way, I'm reading from this, Dante's Divine Comedy. Through my sight, which I gazed, grew stronger. That soul appearance, even as I altered, seemed to be changing. In the deep and bright essence, that exalted light, 3 circles appeared to me. They had 3 different colors, but all 3 of them were of the same dimension. Eternal light, you only dwell within yourself, and you only know you, self-knowing, self-known. You love and smile upon yourself. That circle, which begotten, appeared in you as light reflected. When my eyes had watched it with attention for some time, within itself and colored like itself, to me it seemed painted with our effigy, so that my sight was set on it completely. As the geometer intently seeks to square the circle, but he cannot reach. So I searched that strange sight I wished to see. In other words, the light of God. The way in which our human effigy suited the circle and found place in it. And here's the best part. And then my own wings were far too weak for that. But my mind was struck by light that flashed, and, with this light, received what it had asked. Here, force failed my high fantasy, but my desire and will were moved already, like a wheel revolving uniformly, by the love that moves the sun and the other stars. Okay, what does all that mean? That he got to the end of paradise, and he didn't see God, he saw light, saying that God is light. And so here, force failed my high fantasy, but my desire and will were moved already. In other words, before I was ever even born, this wheel was revolving, this light of God. And what's the light of God? The love that moves the sun and the other stars. So that's the very pinnacle of comedy. Okay, the end of Dante's Divine Comedy, which is what this essay is based off of. Dr. Cowan's theory of comedy. So you have fart jokes, light of God. Okay? Yet any serious attempt at comic theory can hardly escape the conviction that, highlight, works customarily designated as comic, despite their variety, do indeed participate in some sort of community. Stop. If the tie joining them is something like the gold to airy thinness beat of Donne's superlunary lovers, undiscernible to those whose soul is sense, it is nonetheless binding. Such dissimilar specimens as many-turning Odysseus's long voyage home, Aristophanes' fantastic obscenities, and the world intrigues of New Comedy are upon examination found to be capable of coming together in an unlikely harmony with the churchly art of the mystery plays, the spiritual writings of Dante, and Shakespeare's benevolent deceptions for love. Highlight. Something links together in one category works that are outrageously different, requiring anyone thinking about comedy to confront on all sides the most perplexing contradictions. Stop. In other words, comedy is very contradictory. Like it's all of the things in life, and those things have contradictions inside them. And apparently these troublesome circle antinomies, which means paradox, and then paradox, do you know what paradox means? Okay, a paradox is a contradiction between two beliefs that are themselves reasonable. Antinomies is a paradox, and a paradox is a contradiction between two beliefs that are themselves reasonable.
Like Life of Pi, kind of?
Like, what do you mean?
Like how he was stuck between religions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Antinomies contained within the phenomenon of the comic are ineradicable, circle that. It means you can't reduce it. So you could say irreducible by any process of simple reduction. Highlight. The notion of comedy seems, by its very nature, to include all aspects of human life, the darkest as well as the brightest elements in the entire literary spectrum. Keep highlighting. In fact, upon observation, comedy shows itself to be the least exclusive of all literary forms, able to accommodate structures at once simple and complex, treating both the natural and artificial, and reconciling the grossest bodily indecencies, farting, pooping, with the most rarefied spiritual and intellectual refinements. Stop. Yet, despite a puzzling breadth and variety, any single comic specimen is likely to manifest a discernible characteristic that proclaims its identity. Critics, that's us, and audiences, that's also us, alike, have almost without fail been able to recognize a work of comic art, and not necessarily by its possible incitement to laughter. Highlight. Comedies have been designated comedies even when their atmosphere is melancholy and depressing. Stop. As in the plays of Chekhov, or even painful and disgusting. Actually, keep highlighting to the end of the paragraph. Or even painful and disgusting, as in those of Ben Jonson and Samuel Beckett. Stop highlighting. So basically, what she's saying here is that despite its multiplicity of forms, in fact, maybe not in spite of it, but because of it, comedy is easily recognizable, yet not always by laughter. Comedy doesn't always make us laugh. Sometimes it makes us feel gross. Like when people, certain, like if you have a comic get up on stage and they start talking about, racism or sexism or whatever, and you get really uncomfortable, and you kind of like snicker laugh because you're uncomfortable, not because it's funny. Does that make sense? Okay. Thus, one might hazard that an encompassing image lies beyond mere appearances in comedy, capable of being recognized in countless situations with varying characters on different strata of life, with emphasis on many possible segments of the large central action. Such an image could be said to be expressive of the fundamental aspect of human feeling, and as such, to elicit, you know what that means, pull, a response less acquired than innate, circle innate, less reasoned than instinctive. Innate means natural. In fact, highlight, the comic sense seems to suggest to its audience a current hidden current in the flow of life, intelligible to all members of the human race. And at its most basic level, what Susan Longer has called the pure sense of life, and at its highest, the river of living water spoken of in the scriptures. Stop. Well before apprehending plot, character, or theme, spectators or readers are able to observe clues pointing the direction in which their imaginations are circle impelled, which means pushed. They can almost unconsciously gauge from angle and speed the implied destination, the completed curve, one might say, of which only an arc is visible. So, what she says here is, if you have just an arc of something, what's the finished product look like?
A bow?
Yes, yeah, you're right. If you have just an arc of something, what is the finished product? Is it a square? It's a circle. Do you have to see the whole circle to know it's a circle?
No.
No, you just got to see a little bit of it. Highlight. Audiences and readers are hence not likely to mistake comedy. They are able with little difficulty to distinguish it from tragedy or epic. Stop. Actually, keep highlighting. Further, comedy might be said to belong to the people as community even more than other genres. Stop. No culture has lacked some manifestation. Circle that. Manifestation. It means examples of. And it is often so much woven into the patterns of a social order that is taken for granted and comes to be disregarded as serious art by intellectual members of society. And yet comedy might be thought of, highlight, as an expression of the communal unconscious of a people, its yearning for a more liberated life, and as such a binding force among its members. Stop. So basically what she's saying here is that we are connected through comedy. But if as viewers people apprehend comedy without much conscious effort, as critics, when they come to analyze the comic effect, they tend to mistake accidental properties of individual comedies, for instance, satire, farce, wit, and humor, for the comedic image itself. But comedy, as a handful of authorities have pointed out throughout the ages, highlight, is not necessarily the laughable. Stop. Wimsatt's remark that a comedy that does not provoke laughter seems to be an odd success is applicable only if one can discern no other, more compelling purpose for the comic vision. Perhaps Plato began the oversimplification when in the Philebus, highlight, he assumed comedy to be about the ridiculous and ascribed the audience's mixed feelings on viewing a comedy to a combination of pleasure and envy, that is, we are delighted at the misfortune of our friends. Aristotle continued this misconception when he viewed comedy as an imitations of characters of a lower type, particularly the ludicrous, which consists in some defect or ugliness that is not painful or destructive. Stop. Medieval theorists, largely following the lead of Aristotle and Horace in an analysis of the formal parts of comedy and its ethical nature, gave their chief concern, highlight, to comic catharsis, which they deemed to be laughter, and to the comic moral responsibility of teaching. Stop. And then put a star next to those lines because that's really important. So we just got done with tragedy, talking about tragic catharsis, which is the purging of pity and fear that's built up through the course of the play. Comedy, the catharsis in comedy is laughter. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm uncomfortable, I always laugh. Or when I'm like in a situation where things are weird, I make a joke because it seems to lighten the mood. That's how I do a lot of my teaching. And when you lighten the load, find it. When you lighten the air, I guess you could say, people will accept teaching more often than not. I've heard that if you're not comfortable with a teacher or the atmosphere of their classroom, or if you don't like them in some certain way, you're probably not going to learn too much from them. But if I always call my teaching serious fun, where it's serious, but I also want it to be fun. And I think that comedy and joking around helps with that. And so that's the comic moral responsibility of teaching. In other words, comedy is there for us to learn.
So, like, why do people Why do people make fun of other people and like they think it's funny? Like, I don't.
Well, that's what, and we're going to talk about that. This essay is going to talk about that.
Oh.
But even here, up here in the paragraph, it says that Aristotle says that comedy is an imitation or like a miming of characters of a lower type, but it's not painful or destructive. So if it's painful or destructive, it's just bullying. Like if someone's making fun of you, that's not funny. It's just bullying. So comedy, let's say that you have, like Dave Chappelle is my favorite example, because he will get up there and make fun of the African American community, like all the time. And he can do that because A, he's black. Can't really do that if you're something else. But B, he's like being real about things. And he's not like, he always uses the pronoun we this, we that. And so if you include yourself in like the making fun of your community, then it's the lesson there is there's a lesson to be had, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That makes sense? But if it's someone like me getting up and making fun of a community that I'm not a part of, then it's just bullying, verging on hate speech. Right? That makes sense? So, and that's when people are like, oh, I'm just trying to be funny if they're making fun of people. I'm like, no, you're just a bully. That's not funny. There's no funny there. It's just mean. And something's wrong with you. That you have to bully somebody else like that. The immense body of Italian Renaissance literary criticism had no trouble reconciling the still dominant medieval didacticism, blah, 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 with a new humanism, led to highlight widespread conviction by the 18th century that comedy teaches the sensible attitude toward life, raison, by ridiculing the rigid, extreme, fanatical, and pretentious. Stop. In other words, if you are extra, we are going to call you out. If you're a fanatic, if you're pretentious, which means to look down upon other people, if you're extreme, we're going to call you out. You're going to get made fun of. And not in a bullying kind of way, but in a, here's reality and here's, I'm putting it in your face kind of way. A few critics and philosophers in our time, Longer, Albert Cook, Fry, Colgill, among others, have given their attention to what is behind comedy, the invisible metaform, which I have been speaking of as the image. But in the main, the bulk of comic theory today, as in the past, has tended to develop around the idea of, highlight, social melioration. Stop. It means a way to make society better. A way to make society better. So to ameliorate someone's pain is to basically maybe apply a bandage. So comedy is kind of the bandage to the owies of life. Make sense? Largely deriving from Greek and Roman New Comedy. And though over the years criticism has clarified formal elements and distinguished between such strains as wit and humor, burlesque and satire, farce and comedy of manners, it has chiefly remained concerned with constitutive elements rather than the entire phenomenon of comedy. Its governing outlook, one might say, that which makes a single imaginative mode and animates its specific parts. Further, comic theory as it now stands seems to have made little effort to apprehend the way in which a particular instance of comedy, even when it represents only a portion of the complete comic action, evokes and fits into a full imaginative world of comedic possibilities. Highlight. The task of understanding the nature of comedy, then, is to be pursued less by analysis than by vision. Stop. Consequently, comic theory poses a problem that can hardly be solved by, circle, empirical methods, by, circle, juxtaposing, or even, circle, superimposing, artworks generally designated comedies and attempting to, circle, ascertain their common structural or thematic constants. However much a strategy may constitute a beginning. It is by its necessity and circle ontological question that the literary critic poses in seeking to know the essential nature of comedy. And though a satisfactory apparatus for resolving ontological questions may not be readily at our time, where are we at hand in our time, nonetheless, the serious critic of comedy must at least make the attempt to engage the issue. All right, empirical means scientific. Juxtaposing means to set against something else. Superimposing means to set on top of something else. Ascertain, which means gain an understanding of. He's probably being pulled out of class so he can go to the bathroom because look at all that water. He's got to spend 30 minutes in the bathroom just to get rid of all that pee-pee.
Ew.
Have a good day, Drake. See, I just made a potty joke and it's funny.
We're going to the dentist.
That was fun. Do you have any cavities?
Dentist.
You have cavities?
Yes.
Hopefully not. You know, my brother's never had a cavity and he's like 48.
Really?
Yes.
What the hell?
That's crazy. Okay, so superimpose means to put something on top of. Ascertain, which means to gain an understanding of. Ontological means to know a thing all at once. We've had the word ontological 4 times now.
What is it? Okay.
Admittedly, highlight. One can know the nature of comedy only through the immediate thing, the individual work. Stop. But the fictional whole, the play or the novel, presents to the imagination an intuition of an invisible form which, from a glimpse, may be apprehended in its entirety. Highlight. It is here that the underlying form of comedy is to be found, not so much in an abstraction as in an image the mind seizes upon with delight. Stop. The task of the critic, however, is not to stay with this super-actual realm, but to return to the work at hand, better equipped to explore its true nature. In such a process, highlight, a specific representation of human action is able to reveal the universal image of comedy that has rendered countless dramatic works of art comic, and as such, recognizable to their audiences throughout the years. Okay, here's my favorite Dr. Cowan quote. Highlight. One does not have to eat the entire pudding to know that it is flavored with vanilla, or that it's a pudding and not a cheese souffle. All that's required is a taste. Stop. So you don't have to eat the entire pudding to know that it's vanilla flavored, but you should. Or the souffle. Eat the whole souffle as well. You guys know what a souffle is?
Yeah, that jelly thing.
Circle souffle. It's a French baked egg.
Why are we circling that?
French baked egg. Why are you circling that? Because I'm trying to be like Jay-Z and step up your vocab. From the Black Album. Come
Okay. Egg? A French what?
Baked.
Oh, appreciate it. I think
Similarly, the character of comedy is so definitive, its reality so unquestionable, that one can discern its nature even from a brief experience of the work. Its qualities, circle, permeate it as the vanilla permeates the pudding and thereby modifies its component parts. For it is not the separate features of an art product that make it comedy. All right, permeate means to pass through.
Wait, what does Dr. Cowan mean by the pudding quote?
She just means that you don't have to eat, for the pudding quote, you don't have to eat the entire pudding to know that it's flavored with vanilla. You just need 1 scoop, right? So if I give you a spoon and I put a blindfold on you, and you put the pudding in your mouth, and I'm like, what does that taste like? You're like, it tastes like vanilla. And what she's saying is that you don't have to eat, you don't have to, for example, you don't have to go to the entire stand-up comedy show to know the guy is funny. Just have to hear 1 or 2 jokes. Conversely, you don't have to hear a whole stand-up show to know somebody's horrible as well. If somebody's trying too hard to be funny, it's just cringy. Right? I'm sure you know people like that. Sometimes when sometimes when I quote like y'all slang, or when I say like no cap or something, I say it with an air of like irony because I know I'm too old to say that.
No cap.
Does that make, you know what I'm trying to say? But I say it like, I no cap, because I'm being funny in a way that, well, it's kind of like how people my age should not be rolling around with their windows down, bumping like music so loud that that the whole world can hear. It's like, you are too old for that. And if you're doing this, do it ironically, because you're taking yourself, you're 49. Why are you listening to Dr. Dre, like, rolling through a high school parking lot like it's 1992? Stop it. You're too old for that. Am I right? You know people like this. It's like, and so sometimes I make fun. That's when you like make fun of your own self. That's actually the best kind of comedy. It shows your audience that you're human. Okay. Top of 5. After the semicolon. Rather, highlight comedy's purpose, the form-making principle of the entire work. It is the purpose, the form-making principle of the entire work that welds all its elements into a single unit. Stop. One should be able, I maintain, to choose any page of a work, not necessarily the beginning or the end, but any portion of it, and discern from a reading of a segment whether or not the work is comic. Highlight. Even though tragic elements may be present in comedy, or comic elements in tragedy, the reader or the hearer can still detect the general character of the work as a whole. Stop. In Hamlet, for example, the wordplay, punning, levity, wit, Hamlet's antic disposition, which means fake madness, his wild and disconcerted action are devices that one associates with comedy rather than tragedy. And in point of fact, the young prince does behave for a while like the comic protagonist, as in his baiting of Polonius. I am going to show a video now